all started after the end of apartheid. The new South Africa wants her back. It was the beginning of the 19th century. She was a young woman coming from far away. She's been both a servant and a great attraction. She's been both a Venus and an exotic freak. A cartoon and a song, a vaudeville and a book. She's been a woman and she's been an ape. How could the same person play so many different parts? She was like a beast, drawn, measured and chopped, then preciously preserved in a French museum. Even in death, she was given no rest. Now she is in Paris, at the Musée de l'Homme. In case number 33, they keep her skeleton. Why is she considered a symbol? Her name is Sara Baartman, and this is her story. Sara Baartman was born in South Africa in this vast, tranquil landscape that is the Eastern Cape. She belonged to the Khoi, a nomadic people who had roamed freely across this land for centuries. From north to south, east to west, they wandered in search of greener grazing pastures for their livestock. They lived in caves on which they recorded their lives and history. But in 1790, the tranquility of this place had long since been shattered by the brutal arrival of the Europeans. And at the time of Sara's birth, her people, the Khoi, were engaged in a guerrilla war against the encroaching Dutch. This meant that the men lived in mountains, ever watchful of the feared commando raids. This also meant that only the women, children, and the old were left in the villages to fend for themselves. Sara was born and grew up in a war zone.
We know of the near extermination of the San, or Bushmen, by commandos from Cape Town, because, as they said, the Bushmen were stealing our cattle. And so thousands and thousands of San, or Bushmen, were shot over weekend commandos, like people going hunting. There was the feeling that you could do with what you liked with these people because they weren't quite human. They were subhuman, they were near human, but they weren't us.
This is an actual witness account of a Boer commando raid on a Khoi village.
They surrounded the place during the night, spotting the Bushmen's fires. At daybreak, the firing commenced and lasted until the sun was a little way up. The commando party loaded and fired and reloaded many times before they had finished. A great many people, women and children were fired upon that day. The men were absent. Only a few little children escaped, and they were distributed among the people of the commando. The women threw up their arms for mercy, but no mercy was shown. Great sins were perpetrated that day.
This is probably how the young Sara came to Cape Town.
Quel était le statut, quelle était la position exacte de Sara Baartman dans son lieu d'origine? On n'en sait rien. Ce qu'on sait, c'est qu'elle est venue au Cap comme servante. Bon, c'était un mouvement finalement assez fréquent. Lorsque les sociétés Khoi se décomposaient, finalement, les individus n'avaient pas d'autre choix que de s'engager chez des fermiers blancs et de travailler comme serviteur ou de venir au Cap et de trouver un petit travail. Bon, c'est probablement de cette façon-là que Sara Baartman est arrivée au Cap de Bonne-Espérance.
She would have been ingeboekt, contracted out to a farmer somewhere in the vicinity of Cape Town, or she would have worked for the Cape Corps itself at various public works, building roads, building buildings, doing the core washing, that type of thing. So that is well how she could have ended up on Caesar's farm.
This clumsy amateur sketch is all that remains of the house where Sara worked as a servant until 1810. The farm belonged to Peter Cesar, a Dutch farmer. In the spring of the same year, Peter Cesar received two visitors. His brother Hendrik, accompanied by a British surgeon named Alexander Dunlop. The two men knew too well that for the past 2 centuries, Europeans had been fascinated by the Khoikhoi, especially the women. This would explain their immediate interest in the 20-year-old Sara.
The Khoikhoi or Hottentot peoples of southern Africa were particularly interesting to Europeans because they had an almost morbid fascination in the genital and special features of the Khoikhoi people, especially the females. And there had long been rumors in Europe that there were some very special and interesting and unusual features about Khoikhoi ladies' genital anatomy. And although it is today repugnant to us to think about such matters, these early naturalists wanted to find out for themselves, were they, as rumor had held, were they something very different and very special? Behind it, there was a mindset. And the mindset was, are these people really human? There was even a feeling that they didn't belong to our human species, which all the rest of the world belonged to, but they were something apart.
Hendrik Cesar and Alexander Dunlop both knew that if they could convince Sara Baartman to accompany them to Europe, they would make a fortune.
If she was a slave in Cape Town, she had very little choice about her life. Once she was a slave, she had very little choice about where to live, how to live, what to do. It is quite perfectly possible that if it is true, as Hendrik Cesar says, that he came across her on the farm of his brother, that his brother simply gave him to her as one person would give a slave to another and say, take her. You find her bum interesting, take her and do with her as you will.
Il est difficile de dire que Sara Baartman est partie librement du Cap pour devenir célèbre et pour faire fortune en Europe, mais il est aussi difficile de dire qu'elle est partie contrainte, mais finalement dans les fers, vers l'Europe. Je crois que la réalité est plus complexe et témoigne finalement de la réalité coloniale au Cap au début du 19e siècle. Ce qui s'est passé probablement, c'est que deux impresarios ont profité de sa crédulité pour lui faire signer un contrat, pour lui faire miroiter le fait qu'elle deviendrait riche et célèbre et qu'elle pourrait revenir après au Cap. Pourquoi ça marchait si bien finalement ça? Sans doute parce que les conditions économiques dans lesquelles vivaient les Khoikhoi au Cap au début du 19e siècle étaient tellement déplorables que certains individus, comme Sara Baartman, voyaient ce voyage en Europe comme une possibilité d'émancipation économique, comme une possibilité de sortir de leurs conditions finalement économiquement serviles.
On the 20th of March 1810, Sara Baartman, Hendrik Cesar and Alexander Dunlop boarded a ship bound for England. The journey lasted 3 months. What went on in that young woman's head as the ship set sail, we will never know. What is certain is that she would never again see her motherland. Sara Baartman arrived in London in June 1810. England had abolished the slave trade just 4 years earlier. As a young black woman, what were her prospects?
When Saatchi turned up in this country, the black population was still mostly living in London and the seaports in various states. On one hand, you can say that the majority of the black people here were of the status which is known as slave servants, that midpoint of servitude, and that's just a fact. On the other hand, you can look at the writings of a noted socialite like Mrs. Hester Piozzi, who noted 8 years before Saatchi turned up in London that there were black ladies in all their finery in the pit at the opera, attending the opera house. At the same time, she also noted black children playing in the squares with their nurses. So although there was a concessionary number of black people who managed to move through society with relative ease, the majority of the community were in some sort of servitude or some sort of beggary.
Uppermost in Hendrik Cesar and Alexander Dunlop's minds was to profit from their rare specimen. They approached William Bullock, the keeper of the Art and Natural History Museum. They offered to sell him Sara Baartman and a giraffe skin. Bullock bought the giraffe skin but refused to buy Sara. Apparently Dunlop panicked and asked Cesar to buy him out of their deal. Cesar, believing he was onto a huge money spinner, began to put his plan into action.
They thought she was a freak because she was different from English women or Scottish women, women in the British Isles whom they knew well. She was different because she had a larger buttocks than one would find in most British women, and for this they considered her to be freakish. If you were looking at her in Khoi society in the Cape, you would have said, oh, there's nothing special about her. She is a member of her population, no different and not freakish at all.
Saartjie Baartman's appearance in London was the first physical confirmation of this semi-mythical phenomena which had been in the minds of English travellers and French travellers even more so for nearly 200 years. They knew this was odd, but this was the first exhibit, and it was a time, as I say, when we were looking for whatever was new.
Piccadilly was even then a popular entertainment area in the big metropolis. Of all the various thrills on offer, freak shows were the biggest attraction.
Freak shows really started in royal courts. Anything that was different in any nation was taken to the king. We've got them recorded in France in the 1400s. Queen Henrietta Maria in this country had a dwarf who was 18 inches high as her jester. And if you look at Velázquez paintings, the imperial court of Spain and Portugal kept dwarfs who used to play with the royal children, but they were also royal jesters. Now inevitably, such people sought income outside the court. They often weren't paid inside the court. And what they did was simply to take to fairs and circuses. We exhibited sapient pigs, sapient horses, fleas that could fight, women who were bears, bears who were women, pigs dressed up as women. Anything went. You could not imagine anything in your mind that was not horrific enough or outlandish enough to be exhibited in return for money.
On the 20th of September 1810, Hendrik Cesar published an advertisement in the Morning Post.
Just arrived from the banks of the river Hamtus on the borders of the Kafraria in the interior of South Africa, a most correct and perfect specimen of that race of people. From this extraordinary phenomenon of nature, the people will have an opportunity of judging how far she exceeds any description given by historians of that tribe of human species. She has been brought to this country at a considerable expense by Hendrik Cesar.
Sara Baartman's show, at 2 shillings per head, was an immediate success. Every day, from 1 p.m. until 5 p.m., large crowds would gather at 225 Piccadilly Street.
The extraordinary thing about her exhibition is that somebody drew a cartoon of it. It's in the style of Rowlandson. It may even have been a sketch by him. There stands this young Khoikhoi woman on a plinth. She looks noble, she looks elegant, she's topless, but she's got the traditional Hosa-type apron in front of her. She is looking straight forward. At her foot kneels a woman, peering under her apron, trying to see the pudenda. In front of her are Scottish soldiers. Why did the artist choose Scottish soldiers? Because they wear kilts. Short kilts in this cartoon. And they have long sporrans over their pudenda at the front. But a dog is at the back, sniffing eagerly up the skirt or the kilt of the Scottish soldier as he tries to do the same thing to what the man at the time probably thought was a noble savage. It's a good lesson, and the sympathies of the cartoonist are entirely with the person being exhibited and not with the gawping crowd.
Oh, have you been in London town? It's rare it is to see. There amongst the ladies of renown, the most renowned is she. In Piccadilly Street so fair a mansion she has got, on golden letters written there, the Venus Hottentot. But you may ask, and well I ween, for why she tarries there, and what in her is to be seen than other folks more rare. She has, though strange it be, large as a cauldron pot, and that is why men go to see the lovely Hottentot. Now this was shown for many a day, and eke for many a night, till sober folks began to say that all could not be right. Some said this was with her good will, and some said it was not, and asked why they did use so ill the Lady Hottentot.
From the depictions of cartoonists and songwriters of the day, one would imagine that Sara's show was one of the most comical and hilarious of London's many attractions. This was not the case. After witnessing the exhibition, a journalist for the Times newspaper reported,
The exhibition took place on a stage raised about 3 feet from the floor, with a cage or enclosed place at the end of it. The Hottentot was produced like a wild beast and ordered to move backwards and forwards and come out and go into her cage, more like a bear in a chain than a human being. When she refused for a moment to come out of her cage, the keeper let down the curtain, went behind, and was seen to hold up his hand to her in a menacing posture. She then came forward at his call and was perfectly obedient.
It's interesting to note that the Anti-Slavery League and the African Institute in London at that time, which was very strongly abolitionist in favor of abolition of slavery, took up her case, and there was a major press controversy about the degradation which was being made on this poor lady who had been brought from South Africa and was now being demonstrated.
She was extremely ill, and the man insisted on her dancing. The poor creature pointed to her throat and to her knees, as if she felt pain in both, pleading in tears that he should not force her compliance. He declared that she was sulky, produced a long piece of bamboo and shook it at her. She saw it knew its
Between the 10th and the 29th of October 1810, the Examiner, the Morning Chronicle and the Morning Post published a series of letters expressing shock at Sara Baartman's exhibition.
I allude to that wretched object advertised and publicly shown for money, the Hottentot Venus. I think, sir, that the air of the British Constitution is too pure to permit slavery in the very heart of the metropolis. Your obedient servant, an Englishman. I am, sir, yours, Humanitas. I am, sir, yours, a white man.
Hendrik Cesar's response followed shortly afterwards in the Morning Chronicle. He claimed that the Hottentot Venus was a willing participant in the show, that she was getting a fair share of the profits, and that anyone who could understand her language would hear from herself that she is treated with the utmost humanity, kindness, and tenderness.
The abolitionist movement had gained a major victory in 1806 with the banning of the slave trade. At the time, slavery was still legal throughout the British Empire, except on the grounds of Britain itself. So, to have found a slave on British ground who had come on presumably a British ship from a British colony would have been to undercut their victory in so many different ways. They fought hard to abolish the slave trade. And I suppose it would have felt to them like a slap in the face. So I think this to me was the motivation behind the court case.
The African institution was an abolitionist movement whose main concern was protecting the rights of freed slaves. On Saturday, November the 24th, 1810, Zachary Macaulay, Thomas Gisborne Babington, and Peter van Wangener, three of its leading members, brought Sara's case before the Court of the King's Bench. The Attorney General sought only an opportunity to ascertain whether the woman was in a state of coercion. He stated,
"Before we can remove her from her present situation, we must be satisfied that she is an object capable of making an election."
These then were the issues to be resolved with Sara Baartman, the Hottentot Venus. The court interview lasted 3 hours, and Sara Baartman was asked the questions in Dutch. The following is a transcript of the interview.
She agreed to come to England for a period of 6 years and was promised half of the money for exhibiting herself. Mr. Cesar promised to send her back home after that period at his own expense. She is kindly treated and has everything she wants. She is perfectly happy in her present situation. She has no desire to return back to her own country. She wishes to stay here because she likes this country. She has money given to her by her master, and on Sunday is allowed to ride about in a coach. No personal violence or threats have been used by any individual against her. She even has 2 black boys to wait upon her.
People have analyzed this court case as if Sara Baartman was a free agent who felt that she was free, who had an understanding of herself and the situation as if she had a choice. And I tried to explain that if she was a Khoikhoi who grew up in South Africa between 1790 and 1810, this would have been highly unlikely. The only way in which she could have seen herself as a free agent would have been if she was born and bred beyond the frontiers of colonial expansion.
I believe that Saatchi was pressurized by Hendrik Cesar, primed and cued to give these specific answers, such as A, stating her happiness to be in Britain, and B, her contentment at being with Cesar. It can be imagined that she was not educated enough to realize that she might have been able to fashion herself a life away from Cesar. Now, we don't really know what sort of influence that Cesar exerted over Saatchi, but she did make these utterances, and the court stood by those decisions.
She didn't want to go back to the slavery which the governor had just unwittingly imposed upon her people. She certainly knew the story, almost certainly must have known the story, it was common in London, that American slaves brought back here, out of 1,100, 400 went back to Sierra Leone, and within a very short period only 64 of them survived. We didn't know about resistance to disease and antibodies that you build up and lose through generations there. She knew that if she went back, she was either a slave or dead, I believe. Of course she refused. She was a sensible woman.
People tend to think of her as this very, very responsible, mature person. No, she was a kid when she went into exile.
After the introduction of this new evidence, it was clear that the 3 members of the African institution had no case. Lord Ellenborough, the presiding magistrate, summed up the case by saying,
"If any immodest or indecent exposure of this female stranger should take place, those who have the care of her must know that the law would direct its arm with uplifted resentment against the offending parties."
He then declared the case closed. A few days after the verdict, Sara Baartman and Hendrik Cesar disappeared from London stages. They reappeared 1 year later in Manchester. Fortunately for Sara, this wasn't another sordid exhibition. She was baptized on the 7th of December, 1811. Did this young woman believe that by embracing Christianity she would gain her freedom? Or did Hendrik Cesar believe that baptizing his Hottentot Venus would gain him respectability? We will never know. This baptism certificate is the last trace of Sara Baartman's stay in England. It will be nearly 3 years later that Sara and Hendrik Cesar reappear. In 1814, they left England for France. Why did Sara accompany Cesar? Was she under the illusion that she was returning home? Now 24 years old, Sara must have believed that the worst was over. Little did she know that Parisian newspapers were already announcing her imminent arrival. Little did she know that the show was to go on. Little did she know that in 18 months she would be dead.
Sara Baartman est la première femme khoï-khoï, le premier khoï-khoï qui arrive en France. Il y avait déjà eu d'autres khoï-khoï ailleurs en Europe à l'époque antérieure, mais en France, c'est la première khoï-khoï. C'est évidemment pas la première africaine à arriver en France. Il y avait déjà toutes sortes d'Africains en France à cette époque-là. Il faut comprendre le contexte, cependant. L'esclavage n'était pas aboli, il était loin d'être aboli encore en France à cette époque. Le contexte politique, c'est un complexe très trouble. Tension entre la France et l'Angleterre, etc. Passage de l'Empire à la royauté. Le contexte intellectuel, c'est le contexte qui fait suite au voyage de Péron en Afrique du Sud. Dans le contexte politique de l'époque, les savants sont ballottés d'un camp à l'autre. Certains des savants qui examinent Sara Baartman en mars 1815 sont des gens qui ont participé à l'expédition égyptienne de Napoléon. Donc il y a tout un contexte extrêmement trouble au plan politique, au plan intellectuel, présence d'Africains en France, et c'est là-dedans, dans ce contexte, que Sara Baartman arrive en France et fait scandale, en quelque sorte.
There is no better place in the whole world. Palais Royal will fulfill your wildest fantasies. The latest fashions, art galleries, gambling houses, theatres, music, the best restaurants, brothels. Palais Royal has it all.
This is how a French journalist described the only place to rival Piccadilly of London. We are at the beginning of September 1814. Hendrik Cesar brought Sara through the majestic gardens of the Palais Royal, and there they entered a shop. He sold Sara to an animal trainer named Ryu and disappeared from her life forever. Just across the gardens, Ryu found the best place for his latest attraction. On the 18th of September, the Journal du Paris ran the following article.
Just arrived from London is the Hottentot Venus. She is to be seen at number 15 Rue Neuve des Petits Champs from 11 a.m. till 9 p.m. Admittance 3 francs.